Hey, everybody. I'm Bruce Martin.
I'm Roger.
Welcome to Inglorious Pastords, episode 6.
Six it is.
And we have a special guest today, I see, Raj.
Well, I just thought maybe we should have our first, you know, guest interview that would come with us. So I'm so glad Rob was able to make.
Not gonna lie. Okay, so speaking of Rob, thank you, Rob Abercrombie, for sponsoring Inglorious Pastords of the Keller Williams.
Is he sponsoring us again? This one?
He is.
I thought he might have bailed.
Over and over. No,
Okay,
just
Rob, we love you.
the Rob Abercrombie team in Huntsville, Alabama, with Keller Williams. Tell us about, before you go anywhere else, tell us about our friend here, Raj.
Yes. So
Realizing that people that can't see this don't know
right,
who's
that's
here.
right. So
Okay.
for our podcast people, there is an eerie 5-foot Santa standing between Bruce and myself, and I brought him in for our podcast because I came over the weekend.
Why don't you tell us why you bought a spooky 5-foot Santa Claus over the weekend?
What you're supposed to say is, isn't that one of your eBay trinkets you sell online?
You're right. I thought that part of the stick was getting old. But this is not a trinket. This, I saw it plugged in, which scares me because if he starts patting me on the shoulder, I'm going to start screaming.
Santa dances and he sings. Yeah, no, that all it happens, and but he's not nearly as cool as last year. I bought the Grinch.
Was he also 5 feet tall?
Yes, no, it was this
Really?
karaoke, and he would sing and dance. By the way, every now and then I may just give an eBay tip. If you ever come across a 5-foot dancing Grinch at a garage sale, buy it. Yeah, probably worth $300 or so. Now Santa here, probably only going to bring 125.
What? This is a $500 relic.
But yeah, so that's another reason to watch this show is you could get significant tips, eBay tips, places you can make money. So the value of watching.
And should eBay want to sponsor us?
Hey,
This is just really a shout out to them. There's been a lot of interest from other groups larger than you. I'm not saying Amazon or anything like that, but if you wanted to get in the game for Inglorious Pastors, there are sponsorships available, particularly after season 1.
But the line is growing. The line is growing. So you're going to want to contact us very, very soon.
Very soon. So Roger, I also wanted to thank you because most of our listeners don't know yet, but Roger has agreed to make a major donation to one of our listeners. So we have 17 subscribers right now on this YouTube channel.
Okay.
And when we hit 20, which I hope we'll do the next hour or so, Roger's going to give you one of his eBay items that's worth something. So thank you for doing that, Raj.
Right. And maybe you guys are picking up that whenever Bruce turns me into a magnanimous giver, number one, I've never heard about that before this moment. But he's right. I love to give. I'm just a wonderful person. So
You're just a giver.
Yes, I'll find some amazing thing among the hundreds of items I have in my eBay store, and you will be very happy.
So while you were out buying $125 meaningless Santa Claus trinkets, I was actually doing ministerial duties.
Oh, were you pastoring?
As far as you know, I was doing a wedding on Friday night at the Monte Santa Lodge. Beautiful, beautiful wedding. I love weddings. I mean, I was talking about this even then. I talked to you about it this weekend, but if you haven't watched The Chosen, and if The Chosen wants to sponsor Inglorious Pastors, you're welcome to do that. I realize you're trying to raise another $500 million, but just in case you go over the top.
I'm very happy with Rob.
No, but I am Rob Abercrombie of the Keller Williams.
Keller Williams,
Yeah.
yes.
So I love the wedding at Cana scene. And so even in this wedding that I was doing this weekend, I brought up the fact that, it's interesting. Genesis begins with a wedding in a garden with Adam and Eve coming together, God taking two and making them one. But it also finishes, at the end in paradise with this wedding supper of the Lamb. And I just realized after watching The Chosen, last week, that right in the middle of that, in the Gospels, this first place that Jesus does the miracle, we talked about that in episode 1, is this wedding. Yeah. So while you were out buying stuff to sell to others for profit, frankly, I was watching two people joined as one, which was profound.
So then over the weekend, you were the pastor and I was the Inglorious.
Yes. So seriously, was there any other reason you brought Santa? Because frankly, he scares me.
He is a bit haunting.
I keep thinking of the plastic, Santa and the Santa Claus 2, where right. Tim Allen.
Yes.
It's just not good. And don't say the word plastic.
Santa likes cocoa.
Yes, cocoa is superior refreshment. No, seriously. I mean,
Santa's just very American. He's very, and I guess I was thinking about things that are very American. And well, this version standing behind us, a 5-foot plastic dancing Santa, is pure American.
Pure American. Okay. Right. I can't argue that.
Wherever Saint Nick's origins were originally, we've turned him into a 5-foot dancing Santa.
Okay. No, I got it. I get what you're going with now. So this is Americana right here. Okay.
Right. And so I guess I was thinking about things that are distinctively American. Did we invent French fries? Was that us?
What would be the French?
Well, I'm seeing the word French is there, but I don't.
We didn't make the croissant either, in case you're wondering.
Well, now I was thinking about American. So like our hot dogs, I thought that was an American, right?
Germany.
They came up with hot dogs?
Yeah. This is.
Have we come up with anything meaningful in the world?
We've transplanted basically everything here.
Is the hamburger, would that be us?
Hamburger.
German.
It's probably German. Hamburg, Germany. It's probably German. That's just a guess. I think ESPN was totally American.
All right. Yes. Another potential sponsor.
I hadn't even thought about that. ESPN, in case you want to sponsor this, as well as Some Good News, which is another mildly successful thing.
So maybe the comical sad connection with Santa is what I'll call. I think of American individualism.
Yep.
So I think of things that are very American, and looking out for me. The world is about me seems to be a very American. Now, I'm not sure we're the originator of that.
But it goes all the way back even to the founding of the country. When you think about the Declaration of Independence, not just independent, autonomous from Britain or the United Kingdom, but that fierce sense of independence, I think, has kind of been woven into the fabric of Americana,
right?
Which is, I'm independent. There's a tremendous amount of, I can do this on my own. Yes. We respect people that pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and high individualism is seen as a positive thing in our culture.
Right. But then the other side of that, and this is what I guess over the weekend, sometimes that's what ends up coming out in the podcast, is I've been thinking about the flip side of that, of not just looking out for myself, but then where I'm kind of thinking, I'm only responsible for my behavior, not responsible for anybody else. That's their business. So I'll just keep to myself. And as long as I'm doing that, but this part of it for me that has crept into the church that sounds, it's very American and maybe almost sounds spiritual, but it's God is only concerned about my behavior as an individual. He's only concerned that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm not doing the wrong thing. I'm not responsible for anybody else. If
Right, and I'm not responsible for anyone else's sin. And it's interesting you say that, because I was just reading Jesus this weekend. What I was doing while Roger was buying trinkets, I was not only marrying people, but I was reading Jesus. But it's interesting.
Very good.
He goes into these cities like Nazareth, where he did his first sermon, and they tried to throw him off a cliff. That's how well that went. He goes into Capernaum and does many of his miracles there. And in the end, he speaks these words. He says, "On the day of judgment, individuals in Capernaum are not going to have it so well." He doesn't say that. He says, "Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the skies?" He said, "No, so it's going to be more bearable for Sodom, like as in Sodom and Gomorrah, on the day of judgment than it is for you." So it's interesting. He took a city and talked about city, in that sense, civic city responsibility,
Right.
and compared it to the responsibility of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. In other words, it wasn't just individuals that are going to be, and even in Matthew 25, when you go back at the end of that thing, he says he's going to gather the nations before him. And again, I've always interpreted that, because of this highly individualistic idea that we have in America, that it's, when he says all the nations, it's just every single person from every nation is going to stand before God, but not collectively. But it's interesting how many places in Scripture where you see this collective judgment referenced.
Well, even if you look at Israel, even if you look at,
right,
there were people doing righteous things and doing right, but then there,
but the entire nation,
but the whole nation came under the judgment of God. You saw this sometimes with families. There was a father's sin, and yet the whole family.
Remember that was judged.
Oh, no.
That was just bad. That's just a few people raised a lot of trouble for a lot of other people.
Right.
And it brings up this whole idea of fair. I loved your illustration this morning. Hey, share with our listeners, because no one listens to your Facebook thing, so this would be an important time for you to get this out. But Roger tells a story that.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot from my childhood. It's interesting that I remember one moment that struck me as very unfair. And I remember, I think I was in, Temple Elementary. I think I was, anyway. So I'm in class, and I remember the teacher saying, now, if anyone talks during this quiz, we're taking this quiz, then everybody will miss recess. And some bozo talked. And this time it wasn't me. And we all missed recess. And I'm like, that's not fair. And I realized, but that is so American, because I shouldn't be judged based on what other people are doing. I'm responsible just for me. But like all through the pages of the Bible, there's an entirely different picture.
Right. And so it's this is where it's convicting to me, because when I see particularly what's going on in our country right now, let's just talk about the race relations and tensions between particularly black, white, and brown. There's a temptation for me to say, hey, I didn't actively oppress anybody, so I'm not responsible for that.
It wasn't my knee on George Floyd's neck. Right.
I never owned slaves.
Right. Yeah. I'm not calling people the N-word.
Right. So I'm off the hook. I'm scot-free. All's good.
We're all good. Except
for the words of Jesus.
And the words of the prophets.
Yes.
So when I look back, for instance, and this is what has been haunting, grieving, troubling me this weekend, as again in this climate, where I think I'm hearing so much, so quick to say, that's not me. But when you read then the Old Testament prophets, you get to Jeremiah, I think it's in Jeremiah 5, and he says, you didn't defend the cause of the fatherless. You didn't stop the exploiting of the poor. You didn't stand up and speak up for and defend those who were being abused, and he calls it evil. And he says, literally, he says, you've become fat and sleek. And there are all these things that are happening on your watch. And if I were one of those people, a nice American, I would say, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not currently exploiting a poor person. And I think this is probably exactly what Jeremiah's listeners may have thought at some point. In other words, this is the justification. And yet the Old Testament prophet, speaking for God, says, if you're not defending the cause of exploited people, the fatherless, the poor, the weak, the marginalized, the immigrants, these are people he regularly, orphans. If you're not defending, if you're not standing up, you're complicit. Now you talk about a word.
Carrie, that's you. Roger just dropped a grenade on Inglorious Pastords, the first of many, I feel sure.
I don't like the word complicit, right? But here's the prophet saying, and by the way, the same prophet a few chapters later says, is this not what it means to know me? You will defend the fatherless. You will defend the exploited. He's not just saying this is what it means to know me, is that you do the right things. A part of,
or that you don't do the wrong things.
Yes.
See, this is where I think Jesus doesn't let us off the hook. You know, there's a lot of world religions that will have the golden rule expressed in the negative, which is don't do anything to someone else that you wouldn't want them to do to you. But Jesus doesn't give us that out. It's not a passive, I'm just not going to do the wrong thing to another person. Jesus says, do for others what you would want for yourself. So if your child was being exploited, you could say, hey, I'm not exploiting him. This is not on me. But chances are you're going to jump in there and advocate for your child or for your family member. And Jesus says, do for others what you want them to do for you. And that's back to Matthew 25. The nations are gathered.
Yeah.
And he talked about, did you, and he's got the nations gathered for him, did you care for the oppressed? Did you feed the hungry? Did you visit the incarcerated? Did you take care of the sick? Did you help the poor? And it wasn't just about what you said or didn't say about them. It wasn't just what you thought, nice things about them. He said, it is as you did to them, you've done it unto me. There's no room for a passive, well, I didn't do the wrong thing in connection with them. And Jesus says, no, it's what you, because the ones that were not a part of his kingdom, it says, well, when did we ever see you and not take care of you? He said, every time you saw someone else and you didn't take care of them, that had need, that was oppressed, that was marginalized.
So again, this is just, so the powerful image that comes to my mind is, if you saw the man under the officer's knee and you didn't do anything. I mean, in other words, there's a responsibility where, again, we're not just saying, I wasn't that person. It reminds me of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Wonderful story from Jesus, right? Just about loving people. And it's such a dear, beautiful story.
No racial overtones in it whatsoever.
Well, there might be, okay. Let's concede. It could have to do with race. We've got Jews and Samaritans. I don't think they got along real well.
Hate's a good word there.
They didn't. There were definitely Jim Crow law type laws. You didn't use the same utensils. You didn't eat in the same places. Well, okay. So you got the overtones. So here's the thing. And so Jesus gets asked a question.
Jim Crow laws. You had the court of the Gentiles because they couldn't get closer. They were less than. Jews could come into these parts, the interior court, but the outer courts. That's just interesting.
The things that became a matter of superiority.
Yes.
And maintaining a line.
Or in their case, Jewish supremacy.
Right. So
back to your story. Sorry.
So I go back to the story, and we're coming back to what you were talking about. So Jesus says the greatest command is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. What you just said, okay? And so a guy wants off the hook. Yes. And he says, well, Rabbi, who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered the question is about complicity. It's about not just doing the right thing or not. So what's the story? So a man is attacked by thieves and robbers who leave him for dead. They don't care whether he lives or dies. They leave him bleeding in the street.
They have actively oppressed him.
Right. Now, it's intriguing here when you think that Jesus' story isn't an answer to highway robbers, it's an answer to religious people. Oh, but then Jesus' story, thankfully, a wonderful religious person comes on the scene, a priest comes on the scene,
Oh,
just in time,
just
right?
in time.
This story is going to end so well for that man dying in the street,
Yeah.
except the priest sees him and keeps going.
Actually, you missed it. Again, I always read deeper and further than you do. He sees him, crosses over to the other side of the road, and then passes by. It's almost like to either one or two things. Jesus doesn't explain what's going on there. Either to feign like he didn't see him because I'm way over here and never saw the guy, or I don't want to be involved with that.
Yeah.
This is a whole unclean. This person must have done a terrible thing to end up in that kind of condition.
Right.
Because they had this idea that if bad things happen to someone, they must have sinned, so this bad thing happened to them. Mm-hmm. Just an interesting little piece there that you have missed.
Yeah. And this is why there's two of us, because I missed the truly deep stuff of the word.
I just love the last podcast. I think I'm going to have this engraved somewhere. Or no, I'll just put it on a mug like Steve Carell did. Bruce is the theological foundation.
Backbone.
Backbone, was that the word? Theological backbone of Inglorious Pastords. So you're going to see a mug with that soon. It'll have my mug on the mug, Inglorious Pastor #1. And on the back of the mug, it'll say the theological backbone. I like that. I'm sorry, back to the story.
And Roger brings 5-foot Santas to the show,
which really is distracting probably to most people that are trying to watch right now. I'm glad the podcast folks can't see that.
Yes.
On we go.
Yes. Stop watching the video. Just go to the podcast.
So the priest sees this guy.
So walks to the other side, unbeknownst to me. You probably did a sermon on that in the past that I didn't know about. Anyway, so, and it's interesting to me again. So one religious person shows up, but it's almost as if, okay, that's not a strong enough point. So Jesus brings a second religious person. Do you remember who that was, Bruce?
Yeah, it was Levi.
Levi. Good.
Think priest in training, like a seminary guy, not quite there at priest level, but certainly it was the family thing for them. Really. Yeah. You didn't know that?
You need to sit at your feet.
It's possible that I made all of that up. But the point is.
The point is, okay, so two religious people come up, and the second one comes, and whether, I don't remember if he crossed the other side as well.
He sees it, crosses the other side.
So it's clear he wants no part of this, and he walks away. And it seems, so there's this indictment here. You have something brilliant. I can see it coming.
No, you shared it one time before, so I'm now repeating you, which is unusual, but here goes. But you said that the priest, like the robbers, didn't care whether he lived or died. The Levite, like the robbers, didn't care whether he lived or died.
Yeah.
That's.
But 3 people in Jesus' story didn't care whether he lived or died. Now, who is Jesus speaking to in this? He's speaking to the person who asked the question is a religious leader. Yep. And you weren't the neighbor. And here he's not talking about what you did, he's talking about what you did not do. What you didn't do. So, in other words, the neighbor, and coming back to what you were saying, loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, if I was dying in the street, well, I would do something. And so Jesus is saying, listen, if you're not caring for people as you would want to be cared for in that situation, and this is the thing that's such a burden for me, is if I'm not caring about, Jesus is passionately concerned about injustice and abuse and exploitation. And that can be any number. It's certainly the poor and the orphans and the immigrants. Here, Jesus is bringing race into the story. And again, this happens so often throughout all of history, where racial groups are marginalized. And we don't love another group as much as we love people who look like us, people whose religion is like ours. Yeah.
Well, and so at one sense, at this point, the crowd that's listening is kind of off the hook. The religious leaders are on the hook, but I think the fourth person that Jesus brings into the story infuriates everybody. I mean, I think everyone's enjoying the story up to that point, but when Jesus introduces this fourth character, I think now everybody, including the crowd, because I think the crowd is probably going, yeah, you get them, Jesus. Those religious leaders putting heavy burdens on us. Yeah. And then Jesus introduces
right
the fourth person,
which is the Samaritan. And so this person that they would meet with, they would go to the other side
yes,
of the country. They're
would
not even going to pass through Samaria. If Samaria is in between where they want to go, they're actually going to take a roundabout road where they don't even have to
a day's journey or more to go around that, so
around Samaria.
Samaria.
Right. So intriguing that's
you talk about racial.
Well, maybe I'm just thinking about
complete segregation.
Walking to the other side of the street, how powerful or apt that image is.
Yep.
So the person that his listeners, all of his listeners, would go out of their way to avoid, that's the one who loves God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength because he loves his neighbor as himself. The hero in the story, the one who loved his neighbor, the one, because the whole thing started with what's the greatest command? The one person in the story who was obeying the greatest command in all the scriptures was the despised Samaritan. That group of people, we are not like them. We don't hang out with them. That is not, and yes, at that point, Jesus has everyone's attention and irritation.
Yeah. And the one person that culturally should be least likely to stop, to see it and to stop and to do anything is the fourth person introduced in the story.
Right.
And yet the Samaritan, it's interesting the way that Jesus sets it up, sees him, and then the narrative changes. He doesn't go to the other side, which actually culturally he should have done, in the sense that we don't want to be seen together. We don't want to share the same side of the road together. And it's that he stops and has compassion on him. And then literally empties his pockets at multiple levels to care for this person. I haven't thought about just not only caring for his wounds and all that. So he's touching in their law system, someone that's unclean. So, and
someone said that's maybe why the religious leaders are kind of backing off, right, which is tragic.
Yeah. We don't want to become
our unclean. Religious principles don't allow us.
We can't go worship at the temple if we stop and help this person. Not only that, but then he puts him on his, I don't even understand the significance of this, but I think it's huge. He puts him on his donkey. So now you're carrying him. So he's not even at that point riding the donkey. He's now got another person on the donkey. He takes him to the innkeeper, the closest thing I suppose they might have had to a hospital, and says, take care of him. And then beyond that, it's this long-term relationship. He says, now anything that he needs beyond this, beyond now, when I come back through, I'll take care of that, which is just extraordinary. I mean, it's one thing just in the crisis, just to immediately take care of him and then kind of leave it to the innkeeper to, well, it's your responsibility now. But he continued in this relationship with this person.
And so I'm listening and I'm thinking, this is this thing that Jesus does. And my guess is the guy who said, well, who's my neighbor, is regretting that he asked that.
At that point, yes.
At this point, why did I know not to ask the rabbi questions? Because here's what happens. Jesus gets annoyingly specific. And this is one of the things we continue to see with Jesus. We have this sort of mushy idea. We're just supposed to love everybody, except that Jesus would get into such specifics with that.
Jesus would regularly take love. Love is more than a feeling.
Yeah.
It's far more than a feeling that you have about a person.
No, and so we want to just say, oh, well, I'll insert. Because this is one of the things I see happening. I love everybody. And honestly, even when I see questions come up about racism, or questions come up about whether the poor in our culture are being exploited, and what I hear from our circles is, hey, God, Jesus says love everybody. We love everybody. We're nice to people. And Jesus is going far beyond. And so I look at it's where he would get specific is you pray for, you do good for, you give a cup of water for, but that's what's happening in this story. So it's not just the Samaritan, it's time, it's inconvenience, it's risk. Others have pointed out again, the robbers could be lying in wait and looking to say who comes first on the scene.
Second victim, right?
So that's risky. This guy is bloody. I think both you and I have come on the scene of an accident and helped somebody. And I mean, I literally remember there's a car that was after the tumbled. I'd seen. We were there. We were the first people on the scene, and this couple of elderly couples hanging upside down in their car, which is on its hood now, and there's bleeding, whatever. Remember, I'm trying to help support this woman, and a medic gets on the scene within a few seconds, who just happened to be driving by and said, "Do this, whatever." And I realized only later, after I had this person's blood all over my hands. So I'm thinking here again, that's what's happening here. You say it's messy. I'm putting him on my donkey. It's time consuming.
That's putting him in your car.
Yes.
That's driving him to the hospital. And that's saying, I'll take care of the hospital bill.
So I'm paying the bill, and then I'm looking beyond it, how long.
Right.
And it's like Jesus is saying, again, how would you want to be cared for? And this is the thing. If I'm dying, if I'm being exploited, or if I'm not being treated fairly, it's not enough for me to say, I don't do that to people. If I'm not stopping it or protesting it, or challenging it,
or advocating for the person who is being oppressed or marginalized,
then I am actually complicit.
And that's what I wanted to get to, because it's very sobering to me. I can only tell you my story on this one, but at the end of Matthew 25, when Jesus talks about who gets in the kingdom and who doesn't, he says he will reply, the king. He says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these." Whatever you didn't do for them, whatever you did not do for them, you didn't do for me. And so if we see the oppressed differently, the marginalized differently, or even minorities differently, because you and I grew up in a majority culture. And for years I felt good about the fact that I wasn't actively oppressing anyone.
Right.
I'm not actively stealing from poor people. I'm not actively keeping someone from getting a job. I'm not actively. But then you read these words from Jesus. By the way, that's how I had my phone. It wasn't I was checking out on Roger. I was just looking up Matthew 25 on my phone.
I assumed the best about you.
I know you did.
Yes.
But it's this thing that if you did, it's what you didn't do that in that case condemned them, not what they did do. That's Jesus's final word on complicity. It really is. That's sobering to me.
It's this word about communal rather individual. We are our brother's keeper.
Yes.
We are that haunting question. I wonder how much we're saying, am I my brother's keeper? But I didn't do this.
The sounding answer seems to be yes.
and the disturbing answer of Jesus and the prophets is, you have responsibility for the community. You can't simply look what I'm doing. Am I doing righteous? Am I making sure my behavior, whatever, that is the only thing? If I am ignoring or just not acting on behalf, well, Jesus, I'm ignoring Jesus. Is this not what it means to know me? God says, to defend the fatherless, to stand up for the poor, the ones who are being abused in the court system.
And here's the other interesting, there's a tension that's woven into this that but this whole idea of individual responsibility and communal responsibility. And I was thinking this morning when Roger first came into the door, I was thinking, well, where did we get this? Where did we have an idea of only individual responsibility? I remember for me, it sort of began with the Chick publications. This Is Your Life. I don't know if you ever read those little comic books, but it would show one guy and just one guy's sins. And sure enough, on Judgment Day, there's a huge screen. And he's watching his life on screen, every lustful thought, every time he stole from someone. And so it even strengthened this idea of individual responsibility. And by the way, we're not as far as I know, we're not taking away from individual responsibility.
Right.
We're saying that these things are somehow connected in ways that I don't always want to put together. So there is individual responsibility. When I choose to do something wrong, I'm responsible for that. But there's also, not only is there communal responsibility, there's communal consequence. It's that thing that you talked about. One bozo talked, and everybody misses recess. How often in our culture does one person do the wrong thing? I mean, I'm thinking about even in the protests right now. So if you have people that are coming and maybe in a peaceful protest about a significant injustice, but one person does the wrong thing, breaks a window, whatever that is.
Right.
Now all of a sudden we believe in communal responsibility. Now the whole we can minimize the entire thing because of the actions of one person.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. And that's happened in our own Huntsville protests, where 2 or 3 people who actually, as it turned out, looked like us. Right. They're white.
Yep.
At this protest, actually were the ones who went at officers, and that's when the rubber bullets come out, whatever. Yep. And I think there's a good word about when we selectively maybe embrace communal
responsibility.
Oh yes, everybody, when we're looking to protests and we're looking and saying, okay, so for some of those who are setting fires, or for some of those who are maybe shooting an officer, or there's somebody who's doing where we lump everybody in. That's all the protesters. That's all. And I've even heard some people, I can't really have any sympathy whatsoever for this cause because they're lumping everything that they're saying into it's all one.
And it's possible we're a little inconsistent about how we apply that. For instance, if a person says, I am against abortion, but I can't be against abortion now because someone has bombed an abortion clinic. So the whole thing is now out. Well, typically people don't do that. They would just say, no, that person was wrong to do that. I still believe this is wrong, and I'm going to continue to whatever that thing is.
Right. If someone, we would be offended if someone was going to take that and say, oh, that represents the whole group. Oh, then the people who are against abortion are all for killing, shooting doctors, and so again, a cause gets entirely dismissed from the actions of a handful,
right?
And it's almost what I would call sort of that, selective.
And sometimes it's because we want to dismiss it. We want to dismiss that. We don't want to believe that we don't want to give legitimacy to that. So if we can find any way to minimize it, we just sort of do. We jump on that thing. Yeah. Here's why that's not credible.
Right. So the kind of sobering word for me, or reminder, and this is what felt like God brought this to my mind today, and I always say that carefully, but it's just I don't like the word complicity, and I don't like the idea of communal responsibility.
Yeah.
But God reminded me today that his salvation is communal and not individual.
Ooh, talk about that.
So the Bible ends up saying, through the righteousness and obedience of one man, all will be made righteous. And some of you know exactly where I'm going. God's whole plan for forgiving the communal sins of the world is the death of one person. And and by the way, I understand why this offends some people. And there are some people, and I've talked to people, whatever, and it's like, no one's going to die for me. It's going to be my right. So I'm going to try and be the best person I can be. And I'm going to do this, whatever. And actually, God says your only hope is a communal salvation. I'm not saying, and I would not, Jesus' righteousness should only be for him, right? No, I realize that the whole biblical story, the whole narrative everything is tied not to individualism but to communal. And if we're gonna grieve over I shouldn't be responsible for what Adam did, we can also say
I shouldn't get the
I
benefit
shouldn't
of what
reap
Jesus did.
exactly. And
Yeah.
but that's the so just remember I just thinking when I start to push back at the idea of communal responsibility, of communal impact, um, of communal compassion,
Right.
that that I need to start seeing as God does. That, and I love Jesus. He calls us his brothers, his sisters. This he's not ashamed. It says to call, and this is I think when I look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, and I look at there's not anybody that we should be looking at and not seeing them as our family, and not saying. And I'll just say the thing that ended up haunting me coming out of then that parable of the Good Samaritan was when I'm listening to the words of Jesus was, okay, Raj, what would you do if George Floyd was your dad? You know, what would you do if Philando Castile was your son? What would you do if Tamir Rice was your son? What would you do if Breonna Taylor was your daughter? What would you do? How would you respond? How would you act? How involved might you get, whatever, if you saw them as family? And I realize the world's a big place and all kinds of people, but where I see God moving us is we've got to stop seeing along lines of division and where okay, that's not my neighbor, that's not my family. It's just that all the time God wants us to begin to see that we have communal responsibility all around us, and not just for the people who look like us,
Yep.
or sound like us, or believe the same religion as we do, or that we see ourselves as a family, and we all bear responsibility to love everyone in the community as we love ourselves.
Everything that we're talking about is so convicting to me because I've been thinking for some time now about there's been seasons of my life when I've been very actively involved in helping people that were marginalized. And then I've gone through other long seasons where because I was really tired or I was emotionally just in a tough place, I found myself avoiding even walking, even seeing need and going to the other side of the road and walking by. And that's where I realized, even as we're sharing this, I still every day depend on the grace of God that opens my eyes to see injustice and to do something, but also the grace of God when I blow it, when I do walk by, because there's been plenty of times where I've walked by on the other, I saw the problem and I walked by on the other side. A haunting thing for me, because I don't know the answer to this, because I don't know in that moment what I would do. You know, some people have criticized those who were filming the George Floyd thing. Why didn't you tackle the officer or something like that? And I'm thinking, all right, I'm a white guy. I probably won't get shot, but would I do whatever? Would I put my, Jesus says, there's no greater love than you lay your life down for someone else. Would I in that moment have said, he's going to kill him? Would I have put myself in jeopardy to save George Floyd's life? But I don't know, barreling into this guy, knowing I don't know. It's a haunting question because I don't know what I would do in that moment. Because it's scary. It's, again, we don't know all that would go. Of course, it's a parable, but Jesus tells parables with people for a reason. We don't know all what might go through a religious leader's mind when he sees someone left for dead.
But I look there really and I see, okay, we're talking about a very striking kind of example, but what Jesus really is getting, what I see at one level is all a time, when we're seeing everyone, we're seeing people as brothers and sisters, as neighbors, then there are places all the time where there's a need, where there's an abuse, where there's and the word here is you've got to, we have responsibility for each other. And I don't know, I just like what you said. And if I'm leaving something with people who are listening, just pray this prayer. I mean, just God, show me where I'm walking across to the other side.
Mm.
Show me the places. Am I, or am I?
That's a dangerous prayer, Roger.
No, it's a dangerous
I'm
prayer,
telling you.
but
But do we want to be the blind leading the blind, or do we want to have our eyes open? And do we want to be awakened to the fact that there could be places that we are seeing, that we're moving to the other side of the road, and we're moving on?
right. If you will pray that and pause long enough for God to speak, you need to go more than a couple of seconds. Good. Nothing came up. Then I think God's going to be speaking to you. That's going to start a process. But I loved also how you finished with grace, because I think one of the things that really was just heavy over the weekend for me is, again, just my own failure. I can look at so many things around it, but I just think about how long I didn't see certain things. But even now, still places where I know I don't care enough. I really, and moments where our moments are just overwhelmed. And I just, that word you had about grace too, just remember that wherever we've walked to the other side, wherever we haven't been that kind of, well, there's also grace for that. Now we need to change. We need to move towards the heart of Jesus, but there's grace. Let's finish that grace word today.
Grace word today, but I also want to finish with that prayer word. That's a beautiful prayer.
Yeah.
You know, God, open my eyes, help me see the places where I'm going to the other side. Sometimes I do it very consciously, you know, because I have an office.
Well, sometimes I know I'm doing it.
I have an office downtown, right on the square, and so sometimes I'll see certain homeless people that I know that frequent that area, and I know there's about to be an interaction, and I found myself sometimes literally parking my car on the other side so I could use a different entrance to get in the building, just so I wouldn't have to have that interaction. And again, I depend on the grace of God in those moments. And I know that it's like you said, Roger, the world's a big place, and it's I can't right every injustice, but I can see, and I can have compassion, and I can do something. So maybe that's the other part of the prayer. God, show me where I'm walking by the other side, but then also show me what's the something I can do. Because I also know what it's like to try to do too many somethings at the same time, and I get overwhelmed, and then I'm depressed, and it's not and it's not good. So there's this prayer to Jesus that says, not only open my eyes, but then show me the something I can do.
That's good.
So thank you again to the Rob Abercrombie team with Keller Williams. Thank you for sponsoring episode 6 of the Inglorious Pastords. I hope this has been helpful to you. It's been more convicting to me than normal, which is probably why I've been quiet. Why I've been quieter than normal.
Yes.
Roger just sort of sneaks up on you like that. You're going along fine, and then it's like, boom!
Sort of like Santa snuck up on us.
Well, that I would really, if I could just knock this guy over, I would. But then you couldn't get your $125 out of him.
He's frightening.
Thanks for joining us for episode 6. I can't wait to see how Roger titles this one. I'm sure we'll have Santa the Samaritan in there somewhere. I feel sure. We'll see you for episode 7.
Ho, ho, ho.
I wish you hadn't done that.